This is exactly what we needed, man. This is exactly the kind of episode we needed after last week. Chill, wholesome vibes, cool lore, great character interactions, really funny comedy. It's just a perfect slice of life episode, and again, we're right back to that glorious laid-back pacing that really lets you soak in the story. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation review. Today we'll be talking about Episode 6, A Day Off in Roa. And you would think that this being a more chill and uneventful episode would mean that there's not a lot to talk about this week, but there's actually a surprising amount of cool information and world building that was dropped on us all at once. But before I get into that, I want to just talk about how nice this episode was. Other than one particular thing you've probably heard a million people complain about, this was just a really nice, relaxed, wholesome, shenanigan-filled episode, and it made me love both Eris and Ghislaine so much more than I already did, and I already like them both quite a lot. But my god, dude. This episode was just so adorable. The scene where Eris and Ghislaine are trying to do math in the market, Ghislaine holding Rudius up to look at market prices, Neko Eris, it's all just really endearing and great, and I think we need F's in the chat for that tickle torture Rudius went through at the end of the episode. For all of the messed up and mature things that Refugin can write, this episode really made me appreciate how well he can write these super genuine and super pure-hearted dynamics. The way that Eris behaves like an actual child, I've seen some people already writing her off as just a typical tsundere, but I don't really see that at all. She's just really loud and outspoken. She behaves in such a realistic, earnest, childlike way that honestly, she's already ascended to my favorite character in the series so far. I love how excited she gets about the things that interest her, how prideful she is, but not to the point where she isn't willing to admit her mistakes or listen to the advice of other people. She's such a great personification of innocence, and just like I said last week, I can't wait to see how her relationship with Rudius develops over the series. Same with Ghislaine, she's been having way more screen time than I expected her to, and it's made me really appreciate even more how straightforward she is as a character. She's basically just a babysitter in this episode, and you get so many funny and cute scenes of her learning from Rudius and just watching on the sidelines as they do their own thing. While we're talking about Ghislaine though, we learn a couple interesting things about her. For one, she can't use magic, which I find pretty interesting because it implies that some people in this world may or may not have the latent ability to do so. And it reminds me of a theory that I saw in the comments about Rudy's incantationless magic, and how the reason why Sylphie might have been able to learn it in the first place is because she learned it at a young age with no preconceptions about what magic should actually be. I don't know, there's a lot of far-fetched theory crafting going on with that, but I think it's an interesting one, and I think it might explain why Ghislaine isn't able to cast it at all. What I find more interesting about Ghislaine, though, is that we learn about the adventurer party that she used to be in, and it's also how Zenith and Paul know her as well. And in the image that's shown in the episode while Ghislaine is talking about this, we actually see Paul in a leader-like position ahead of the rest of the group, and I find this interesting because we know that he is weaker than Ghislaine physically. He might even be weaker than some of the other party members as well, so I find it cool that despite being weaker than some of the other members, he still had those leadership qualities and took charge of the rest of the group. But yeah, in general, I'm just super interested in this adventuring party, and I hope that we get to see the rest of the members at some point in the story. Slightly related, but we get a bit more insight into the Grayrat family that Rudius is staying with as well. We meet Philip's wife, who for some reason already hates Rudius, and I assume it's a little bit deeper than just Rudius staring at her tits, so we'll probably get into that at some point in the future. And we also meet Philip's father, the current lord of Fitoa, Lord Saros. Saros is funny and cool and apparently freakishly strong by the way he punches Philip across the entire room, but what I find most interesting about the Grayrat family right now is a little line that's mentioned about how apparently it would be bad if other members of the family found out about Rudius. Now, your guess is as good as mine, but what I'm thinking here is that maybe they don't want Paul's father to find out about what he's been up to since he ran away from home. That's just a small guess on my part. Honestly, honestly, I think it's probably even more complex than that, and I really love the way they're setting up the entire Grayrat family in general. They feel so important and pivotal to the story despite not really having done much yet, and part of that is because all of the people we've met so far have been really important figures in the world. Philip is the mayor of the biggest city in the Futoa region, and Saros is the lord of that entire region, which, by the way, is a little bit of cool world building we learned this episode, and now we know as the Ashura Kingdom also explains the currency of this land being called Ashura pieces. It also explains in retrospect why those thugs from last episode talked about being fine just kidnapping Rudius, because he's a Grayrat too, and there's probably a lot of importance and political stake in having anyone from that family captured. The last bit of world building this episode that I really wanted to talk about is also probably the coolest world building we've heard in the series so far, and it's all kicked off when Rudius sees a gigantic flying fortress casually sailing overhead the city. We learn that this flying fortress belongs to someone called Perugius the Armored Dragon King, one of the 3 heroes who defeated the demon god Lapis, and that name Lapis might sound familiar because we've heard it spoken multiple times in the series so far, both from a fable book in episode 1 that Paul and Zenith are reading Rudius as a child, and from Roxy when she was teaching Rudius about the Lapis War between humans and demons. So obviously this is super duper life-changing, crazy important lore to the story of this series, and there's lots and lots of interesting thoughts that I have about how this will end up tying into the series and Rudius's adventure, but what I really want to focus on is that key line about how Perugius is one of the 3 people who defeated the demon god Lapis. Because when you first hear that, you think, okay, there's 2 other people who worked alongside him to defeat this guy, but if you really observe this conversation and the context they mention Perugius in, I don't think that's actually the case. Eris mentions that Perugius defeated Lapis with the help of his 12 servants, and he's also just generally the only person they focus on praising in this conversation, which kind of implies that Lapis is a reoccurring threat, one who has been defeated multiple times throughout history. So when they say that Perugius is one of the 3 heroes who has defeated this guy, I think they mean that he is the 3rd person who has defeated him. I think this is also backed up by the fact that they even talk about the calendar changing to the Armored Dragon calendar after Perugius defeated him. Now, all of this is theory crafting on my part. I could totally be off base here, but if this is the case, 1, it's super goddamn cool, and I appreciate it as a narrative device because I'm a Final Fantasy X fan, and Final Fantasy X fans know what goes on in that game, but it also leads me to more theories about why it would be reoccurring in the first place. And if I'm going on my JRPG knowledge on this, I wonder if the person who defeats Lapis eventually becomes them, and is what creates this cycle in the first place. Now I'm just getting into wild, kind of baseless speculation on my part, so I'll leave it at that for now, but I am interested in where this Lapis-Perugius plotline will eventually go in the future. The last thing I really want to talk about in this episode is the controversial Eris Rudius scene. And you guys know, if you've been watching my reviews the past few weeks, you know that I've actually been a pretty stout defender of Rudius. I think there's a lot of scummy elements to his character. I think everyone can agree he makes really questionable decisions and comments at times, but they always felt like they were for a purpose. They're all included because it's for the sake of showing this character at the bottom before reforming them and showing that development into a genuinely good human being. And I have an entire video about this in the works right now, but I have to say that despite all of the defense I've given Rudius over this series so far, I didn't like the Eris Rudius scene this episode, man. I really didn't. I'm not freaking out about it, I'm not angry, I'm not upset, I'm just kind of disappointed and underwhelmed. Because this is the first true time in the series where I felt like Rudius acting this way just added nothing to his character, it added nothing to the story, it just felt really pointless. And it's going to add more fuel to this annoying controversy surrounding the series, And honestly, I kind of think it actually contradicts how his character has been written so far in the series. What I mean by this is, remember episode 3. Remember when I praised that episode for how it handled Rudius accidentally stripping Sylphie because he didn't know she was a girl, and how he felt legitimately terrible for that, and how Paul told him about consent and how that's not how you treat somebody, and it was just a really nice, likable scene for Rudius to show that he does care. He cares about making those decisions and making those mistakes. He has a conscience. He learns something from those mistakes. But here, he does the exact same thing, arguably even worse because Eris is sleeping, and it's just played for the memes. It's a joke. It just felt so out of touch and so contradictory, and I really did not like it at all. And the thing is, I think that degenerate comedy does have a place in this series. The aphrodisiac joke at the end of the episode was hilarious. It just doesn't need to come at the expense of making Rudius this actual terrible person, this criminal. Like, that's just a bit too far in my opinion, and I hope they treat that stuff with more care and treat it more deliberately in the future. On the flip side of all of that though, it's a really small scene. It's cringe, it's a really lame scene, but it's small. It's nothing to get that worked up over. It's super easy to ignore in the face of how great this episode was overall, so I can look past it just because it might only be a small inconsistency in an otherwise well-written character. That's been all for me though, guys. I am interested in what the general opinion of that Eris Rudius scene is though, and if you felt like it crossed the line, or if you think it's completely in character, completely appropriate for how the series has been so far. I'm definitely interested in what you guys have to say about that, because I have a feeling there will be a lot of differing opinions on that, and that's generally where the best discussion is. Just make sure to keep it respectful and keep it constructive. You can follow me on Twitter at PhenomSage, and if you want to continue the conversation and talk with me and a bunch of other cool people who enjoy this series as well, you can join my Discord community in the description below. Subscribe if you want to keep up with the Mushoku Tensei reviews that I release every single week. I love you, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.